So let's talk about what you think we all can learn from poker that can be applied directly to our lives. I mean, there are clearly some very pragmatic, simple factors, such as understanding the odds, understanding how probability works. Um, there's so much evidence in the world of people not understanding probability. It's always struck me that, like, the lottery, for instance, is effectively a tax on not understanding probability, right? As is the roulette wheel or a slot machine, right? On average, you will lose money. Repeat this behavior and you will lose money. Whereas the stock market, on average, S&P 500, on average, you'll make money. What comes to mind when you think of some of the pragmatic lessons people can learn from poker?
I mean, I think the single most important one is something that we've already talked about, but I think it's so important that we need to reiterate. And that's learning to separate process from outcome. Learning that outcome is not actually a proxy for process, that you need to be focused on the things that are actually controllable, on the things that you can actually do, which is, how am I thinking? Am I making the right decisions? What's the information I'm using? How am I choosing information? Kind of, what are my informational filters? What am I inputting into, the little black box of my brain to make this decision? How am I acting? How am I reacting? How am I controlling my emotions? What am I projecting to other people? Those are all things that are part of your process, part of your decision process, part of the things that you can actually do something about. And then the outcome is going to be what it's going to be. And it's going to actually be totally separate. So what you can do, the best you can do, is to, quote unquote, get your money in as a favorite. And if you're in a poker game, that's actually the case. So you want to have probability be on your side. You want to, if you're a 60% favorite, you should make the same decision every single time, because over time you're going to win. But you know what's going to happen 40% of the time? You're going to lose.
Right.
And that doesn't mean it was the wrong decision. 60 ain't 100, even 90 ain't 100. And if you were always judging based on outcome and the wrong thing happened and you say, oh, I guess, I shouldn't do that again. Or if conversely, you're the one who got your money in poorly, if you were the dog and you ended up lucking out because you just got lucky, you shouldn't do that again. But a lot of people think, oh, I'm brilliant, I'm great, this is awesome. We conflate the two. And in poker, you learn not to do that because it's so clear what's you and what isn't. You can actually see the probabilities. I mean, some people don't, some bad poker players don't, but good poker players know how to tell the difference. In life is much messier. Life is noisy. It's so easy to never learn that lesson. It's so easy to take credit for good outcomes, and it's so easy to blame something else, to blame the environment for bad outcomes. Poker is such a powerful corrective for that. And that's so important, both in terms of your own life and your own decision quality, but also in terms of how you judge other people. I think it'll make you a kinder and a better human being if you realize that process is not outcome, and get that judgy look out of your eyes. Not you personally. You do not currently have a judgy look in your eyes in this video. but people who do that, who say, oh yeah, of course, he's stupid. Of course he failed here. Well, are we sure? Do we have information to say that? I mean, maybe he is stupid, but maybe he isn't. Let's take this one step at a time. Let's actually pause. Let's actually unwind, take a step back and figure out what's going on here. It's such an important mental habit. And to me, that's the most important thing that you can take away when it comes to what the game specifically can teach you that almost nothing else can.
So interesting. And I loved your comment that since playing poker, you've become more likely to say, I'm 75% sure that the following is true, right? I mean, that you basically sort of discount, you're more analytical about your levels of certainty, right? We have a tendency to be much more binary, right? About how we think about certainty.
And I was so guilty of exaggeration. I mean, I come from one of these families that's very loud, and we talk over each other, and we talk at dinner and everyone's talking with their hands. And my husband always thinks that we're arguing because he doesn't understand Russian. And he thinks that, and I say, no, it's not argument. This is how we talk. And we always also exaggerate things. And you always state very strong versions of your opinions. And so I was very guilty of saying, oh yeah, no, this isn't true. This is true. And I knew that that wasn't necessarily the case, but I stated it with a little too much confidence. Poker has really cured me of that. Poker teaches you intellectual humility in a very real way, because you start to realize just how powerful uncertainty is and how much you have to respect it. And you become so used to calibrating your level of certainty that it does bleed over into life. And yes, I mean, people sometimes think it's weird when I do this, but all of my friends have come to appreciate it, because I mean, if we're not in COVID and we actually are going out and seeing people and doing things, it's actually really nice if someone says, you know, oh, I'm about 70% sure I can make it. That's really helpful.
Right.
Instead of saying like, oh, I'll definitely be there.
Yeah.
Right. There's a big difference between.
In my experience, that's not always received well. You say, but you're right. But it's much more helpful. I'm glad you brought up COVID, because, you know, this is such an interesting moment and challenging moment for so many people. And it strikes me that this epidemic is a kind of collective reckoning with our lack of control, right? We're all, you know, as you said, humans hate uncertainty, right? We're very uncomfortable around uncertainty, and we've all been forced to deal with a really unprecedented level of uncertainty for many, many months now. No one wants to release a book during a pandemic. It's not optimal. On the other hand, your book is really meaningfully about how we deal with a lack of control. And in that sense, it feels very timely.
I think that's right. I think that, you know, I went through an emotional roller coaster when I realized when my book was coming out, because talk about lack of control. We'd planned it out beautifully. My book's release date, June 23rd, was in the middle of the World Series of Poker, 1 week before the main event. We had it planned beautifully. I was going to go to Vegas and do book promotions with video at the World Series. I was going to be able to play the main event again and recreate, well, hopefully not recreate, because I don't want the migraine, but recreate part of the book and me playing this. And of course, none of that happened. And I was really bummed. Because as you say, no one wants to release a book during a pandemic. And then I realized that, you know, this is what my book is about. My book prepared me for this. Poker prepared me for this. All you can do is make the best decision you can and put yourself in a position to do well. And then the rest isn't up to you. And this was the rest. It happened, and it was something that was totally out of my hands. And I was okay with that at the end, because poker teaches you to be okay with it. It teaches you to actually let go of that and to say, okay, you know, the world is uncertain, and that's okay. So what can I do? Let me switch my focus. Let me switch my mindset. Let me, instead of focusing on the scary stuff that's out there, that's outside of my control, that's happening to me, let's focus on the stuff that's not happening to me. Let's focus on what I can do. Let me flip it around. Let me focus on what I can do on my own agency. And when I did that, I became much calmer. I thought, okay, so how am I going to, you know, promote my book in the middle of a pandemic? What feels right? What can I do? Okay, you know, I should focus on these themes because maybe it'll help other people deal with the pandemic, in which case it's actually timely and it's actually good. You know, maybe these are the small things that I can do. And that really helped me reframe things in a much more positive light, which I think ultimately is what you want to be doing when you're faced with uncertainty. And right now, I mean, we're in an awful moment for the human mind, because it's not just uncertainty, it's ambiguity. Not only do we have this probabilistic thing, but we're not even sure what the probabilities are, because no one knows. We're dealing with something new, with a new disease. And so I think that a lot of people would be fine with, you know, quarantine and with staying at home if they knew the end date. Right. And if they knew exactly what the chances, but they don't, and we don't, and things keep changing.
Well, you know, in this sense, poker feels like it brings one back to ancient wisdom, right? You think of Stoic philosophy, you think of the serenity prayer, you know, the wisdom to know the difference between that which we can control and that which we can't control. And I think this brings us to, you know, what feels to me like part of the heart of the book, which is this question of the locus of control, right? And there's this odd subtlety that in poker one wants to have a completely unbiased understanding of what you can control and what you can't. And Eric, who's sort of like the Yoda figure, I mean, the wise elder, has this lack of ego, right? That gives him, one can be neither inadequately confident nor overconfident, right? And maintaining that balance is such a challenging thing, but I think a critical part of life.
Absolutely, absolutely. Which, I mean, it brings me to the title of the book, the Biggest Bluff,
Yes.
which is the bluff that we have to tell ourselves. It's not actually about bluffing in the poker table. It's about bluffing in life. It's about looking in the face of this uncertainty, looking in the face of all these things we can't control, understanding that and saying, okay, I'm going to take back control all the same. In the face of this, I'm going to bluff myself and tell myself that I have a little more internal locus, right? I have a little more control than I actually do, because that's the best thing we can do to keep going, to make the most of our lives, to make the most of our choices, to be, I think, the best version of ourselves. So the two things can coexist. A lot of people think, oh, well, if there's so much chance, then why bother? Nothing I do matters. It's all chance.
Right,
No,
sure.
that's not true. And that's not the conclusion we should be drawing. Instead, we should be doing it, as say what the Stoics have said, the Serenity Prayer. We should be focusing on the things that we can actually change, on the things that we can actually control. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, rather than being a hopeless, nihilistic lesson, it's a very hopeful, positive one. And I think that, a little delusion goes a long way. We can't suddenly think that we're just masters of everything, because we're not. We need to temper it, but we do need that little bit of delusion. It's one of the reasons why I also quote Carl Sagan in the last chapter of my book, who looks at this awesomeness of the universe and says, the people who turn to superstition and who turn to all this silliness in the face of this, how could you do that? I mean, the stuff that we don't know, that's exciting. That's the stuff of curiosity. That's the stuff of the future. We should be blown away by this awesomeness and want to know it, want to understand it, want to do everything that we can to actually embrace it. And to me, that was, I loved his message so much.
But this is a fascinating thing in the psychological research, that it seems that having a slight bias towards a slight exaggeration of an internal locus of control, or another example would be, studies that have shown that optimists tend to have slightly better outcomes. You can't be too optimistic, or you're no longer tethered to reality. But a slight bias, I've always thought, optimism, I've always thought is a little bit of a distortion, a little bit of a delusion, but it seems that a slight optimistic delusion, or a slight exaggeration of the extent to which we are in control, results in better outcomes, right? And maybe this is the biggest bluff that you're referring to in your title.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. But like I said, a little delusion goes a long way. Yeah. But that little delusion is really important. Yeah. And the optimism bias is something that most of us have. And we see ourselves in a slightly better light than others see us. And we see ourselves as slightly less negative than others might see us. And we see things as working out slightly better for us than they actually might. And that's what keeps us going. Those are the seeds of hope, because if tomorrow's going to be worse than today, then why bother? Yeah. And it turns out that the only people who see themselves accurately, who don't have this optimism bias, are the clinically depressed. So that's actually, it shows that not only do we have better outcomes, but it's protective psychologically. But it is really important to acknowledge that reality, to acknowledge that delusion, and to keep it anyway. But I think acknowledging it is really important. You get into trouble when you're a little too hubristic, when you don't realize that it's the biggest bluff, when you actually think that it's reality.
Well, and as you know from playing hundreds and hundreds of hands, thousands of hands of poker, it really comes down to an edge of a few percentage points, I would imagine, right?
Yes.
So even if so much of our lives is out of our control, that piece that is, and playing that piece correctly, can the cumulative impact of those wise decisions can be quite profound.
That's such an important point. I'm so glad you brought that up, Rufus, because one of the things that I learned in playing poker is just how powerful 1% is. I mean, it's huge. At the beginning, I poo-pooed it. I heard these statistics that, oh, when you have suited cards, it only gives you a 2% advantage, and I was like, oh, so it doesn't matter. And then I realized
Yeah,
that it
it's
does
fascinating.
matter.
Yeah.
That people kill for a little bit more of that edge. And so, yeah, if it's only 1 extra percent, 2 extra percent, it's huge. I mean, think of how vast the world is. Think about if something happens to 1% of the people, what does that actually translate to? I mean, there are billions of people in the world. We're
Right.
talking about millions of lives. So that just gives you a sense on a bigger on in a way that our mind can grasp a little bit more. That 1% is insanely big. So
Yeah.
if I
Right.
can get that 1%
Yeah.
control edge, I will take that with both my hands. I will say thank you, and I will hold on to it for dear life.
Amazing. My last question for you, Maria, is how have you changed as a result of this journey? And it's a question that probably would be best asked of your husband or some other, good friends that would say, okay, we knew Maria before she went on this journey and Maria after this journey. Would people describe you as having been changed by it?
I think so. Well, I mean, I have a quote from my husband who noticed a change in me halfway through my journey. And he said, and I quote, "You take a lot less shit from people than you used to." And I think that that's true.
That's good.
I think that's even more true now. So I think it has made me a stronger person, someone who's more assertive, and I think someone who's a little bit better able to stand up for myself. But I think it's changed me in other ways as well. I mean, I think it's made me a better friend and a better partner because I pay attention to people more closely and I pay attention to nonverbal cues more closely. I actually, because at the poker table, focus is so important, and being able to see what people are telling you without telling it to you is so important that you have to become necessarily more empathetic. And in poker, the reason you're doing it is so that you can then take advantage of them and take their money. But it's a skill that actually translates so well to real life because all of a sudden you're reading people better. You can sense if someone in a group is uncomfortable, even if they're not saying something, and you can do something about it. You can pick up on all of the things that people are telling you, if even though they might not actually say it, even though they might not actually be verbalizing it. So I think that it makes you a more empathetic person. And I think that being more rational and kind of taking emotions out of decisions also makes you a better person because you're better able to actually dispassionately evaluate things, and being more humble, less hubristic about your opinions makes you a someone who's a better decision maker and also a better listener, someone who's better able to change their mind and to take in information and to kind of evaluate it and to make choices and changes as a result of that. And I think that I'm much better at that. And finally, I think it's made me a calmer, more zen person in many ways. It's funny because I do yoga every single day and I meditate and I have for a long time. And in some ways I found more zen at the poker table than I have through that because it just forced me to kind of to pay attention to the flow of things so much and to let go of outcome, which is one of the things that you're trying to do when you're being zen, when you're meditating, when you're paying attention to things in that sense, when you're being mindful. And I think I was able to find a little bit more mindfulness and calm and peace at the poker table than I have in a very long time, which to me is a very surprising thing. The last thing you'd think that poker would teach you is a more Zen mindset. But I think that in teaching you to be comfortable with the unknown, in teaching you to become comfortable with uncertainty, and to let go of those things, I think that that's one of the reasons why it's one of the most powerful, Buddhist teachers I've seen.
Fascinating and counterintuitive. Well, Maria, thank you so much for your time and for sharing all this with us and for sharing this book with the world. Who I never would have guessed that there'd be so much wisdom and insight available through this extraordinary game. And I think your book goes well beyond the game and contains a lot of insight that a lot of people will benefit from. So thank you so much. I hope your grandmother eventually appreciates that this was a great exercise.
I hope so too.
We can't wait to see what you do next after this chapter.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, Rufus. Thank you for having me.